Ladies and gentlemen, may I please have your attention as we are about to begin. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning and best wishes to us all. Our Honorable Chairman of Research Organization for Agriculture and Food BRIN, Mrs. Pujalestari PhD. Our Honorable Speaker, Mr. Patricio Grassini, PhD, Associate Professor, Department of Agronomy and Horticulture, University of Nebraska Lincoln, USA. Mr. Gonzalo Rijo, PhD, Research Assistant, Department of Agronomy and Horticulture, University of Nebraska Lincoln, USA. Mrs. Susiana Susanti, SP, MSc, Researcher, Research Center for Food Crops BRIN, and our moderator for today, Dr. Yudhistira Nugraha, Head of Research Center for Food Crops BRIN, and all participants who have attended this sharing session. First of all, let's be grateful to Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, who has given us good health and time so we can attend or participate in the sharing session presented by Research Organization for Agriculture and Food BRIN with the topic from Diagnostic to Solution, Closing the Yield Gaps of Cereal Crops in Indonesia. Next, we would like to invite the Chairman of Research Organization for Agriculture and Food BRIN to give welcome remark and open the sharing session. For Mrs. Pujalestari, PhD, time is yours.
With harvest area reached up to 10.41 million hectares in 2021. It is necessary for Indonesian government to raise national rice production to secure self-sufficient in staple food for 273 million population in combination with high rice consumption per capita recorded at nearly 1.6 kilogram per person per year. Ladies and gentlemen, the yield gap has arisen again as a focus for agricultural research. Because narrowing yield gap is identified as one of the biggest problems to maintain and increasing national rice production. The yield gaps for irrigated rice in Indonesia was ranging between 37 till 39%. However, in the case of rain-fed lowland, the yield gap could reach up to 49%. Based on the region in Java and Bali, the rice yield per hectare per season reached above 5 tons per hectare. The average yield of rice in West Java province recorded at 5 5.7 ton per hectare, as well as in Central Java, East Java at 5.6 ton per hectare, and Bali with 5.9 ton per hectare. The main challenge in these areas is increasing the efficiency of production to obtain higher yield, subsequently maintain the soil fertility and minimize chemical pollution. In East Indonesia, the average yield of rice in Maluku is 3.6 ton per hectare. Moreover, rice yield in Central Kalimantan average at 3 ton per hectare, North Kalimantan 3.3 ton per hectare. In this region, we have major constraints, such as delivering the result of research to farmers level. Therefore, the priorities to narrowing yield gap in these areas are through farmers' education or training, and introducing newly rice variety-specific location, as well as guidance to adopt new technologies. Ladies and gentlemen, it is our privilege to have sharing session today from Diagnostic to Solution, closing the yield gaps of the cereal crop in Indonesia. Increasing rice productivity, hence narrowing the yield gap, is a key for rice self-sufficiency to meet rice demand in Indonesia. Based on this webinar, we could increase our knowledge about the yield gaps that can be closed in irrigated rice system as GAPIR, good agricultural practice in rice, which has been implemented at farmers level. Superior yielding adaptive varieties with recommended agronomic practices, including the efficient use of fertilizers, biotic and abiotic control, and the prevention of damage from pest disease. Ladies and gentlemen, I wish our participants have a productive sharing session today to identify main constraints of yield gaps in Indonesia, finding and discussing the solution to close the gaps. Thank you to Professor Patricio and Gonzalo. Thank you to all audiences online and also offline, live from Sukamandi, Subang. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Budi Lestari, PhD, for the remark. Next, we would like to invite all participants to join a photo session. Will all participants please activate their videos? May I ask Ms. Mala to please help with documentation?
Okay, slide 1, slide 2, slide 3, slide 4. Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Mala. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, this meeting will start soon and will be guided by our moderator, Dr. Yudhistira Nugraha. Time is yours.
Okay, thank you, Bu Wardah. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, everyone. Today we're going to have a good sharing session. It is sharing session number 2 for the Research Center of Food Crop, and we will discuss about Diagnostic to Solution, the yield gap of cereal crop in Indonesia. We have a special guest from University of Nebraska Lincoln. It is our honor to be able to have a sharing session with the great speaker. So in this sharing session, we will discuss about the issue that we have facing today regarding to high price of the food. So the high price of the food become contribute to national inflation, and of course to have a solution to high price of food, of course we have to produce more food, and the technology regarding to the production of the food itself is very favorable. But however, the implementation in the farmer field is still not going well. So there is a gap between the yield potential with the actual yield in the farmer level. So we will discuss this problem, and we will find the solution by the discussion in the sharing session. So I will not talk too much. I will call the first presenters, the Professor Patricio Grassini. Is Professor Patricio Grassini in the room, in the Zoom room? Hello, Professor.
Hello, how are you? Selamat pagi.
Okay. Okay. First speaker is Professor Patricio Grassini. So I will read the biography of Professor Patricio Grassini. Yeah, Professor Patricio Grassini is associate professor from University Nebraska Lincoln, United States. He has nationality Argentina, and he has expertise about the agricultural system, yield potential, yield gap, resource use efficiency, crop physiology, and modeling. There are many high impact factor publications has been published by Professor Patricio Grassini, and he in last 4 years, I think Professor Patricio Grassini has collaboration with Indonesia regarding how to study the yield gap on cereal crop and also on palm oil. So in this sharing session, Professor Patricio Grassini will deliver his speak title about From Diagnostic to Solution, Closing the Yield Gap Cereal Crop in Indonesia. Professor Patricio Grassini, you have 20 minutes and time is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Yudhishthira. It's a great pleasure to be here. Selamat pagi, everybody. Again, I want to start by thanking the organizers of the event and for the invitation. This is my second time to be here in BBPADI, and it's always nice to be back, especially after the pandemic, and meet again with so many friends. But before starting, I want to make sure that they can listen to me right. Is the sound okay? Right. The video, everything is fine.
Yeah.
All right.
Your sound is very good.
So I want to start by thanking Ibu Puji Lestari, the chairman of Research Organization for Agricultural and Food. I also want to thank Dr. Yudhishthira who is the head of Research Center for Food Crops, and also the director of BBPADI, Judy Sastro. And not less importantly, I want to also thank Susiana Susanti and Norburan Agustiani for organizing the event and treating me here and making me feel like at home here in Sukamandi. All right, so I'm going to now share my presentation, and you will tell me if you can see it. Okay, so can you see my PowerPoint now?
Yes.
Can you all see my PowerPoint?
Clearly.
All right. All right, great. So I think that we can start. Today I want to tell you a story that started many years ago when we came here in 2015, and together with a delegation from a University of Nebraska. And at that point, the university was exploring collaboration with Indonesia. And one of the areas that was identified as a priority area by the Indonesian government was on food security. And that's why at that point we started working with a group from the Indonesian Soil Research Institute, with Professor Famudin Agus, in trying to understand how much more rice and jagung Indonesia could produce. So that was the start of the story back in 2015. But you will see that during the past 7-8 years, we have accomplished a lot, and it has been a great pleasure for me to work with Indonesian researchers and also learn so much about your beautiful country. So let's start with the story. And by the way, although I am the one who is presenting about this work, this is really a team work that includes many researchers from Indonesia, especially my good colleague, Professor Famudin Agus, but also many others from UNL, from BPTP, from BB Paddy, from ECIR, and from ISRI. So again, I'm the one presenting here, but this is really a work that was done by Indonesian researchers in Indonesia and for Indonesia. All right, so one of the reasons why it's so important in Indonesia at a global level is because it's one of the most important producing countries in terms of rice, in terms of paddy and jagung. And Indonesia has relied in the past on imports for both crops, although that reliance on imports has been reduced in recent years, but it's uncertain what's going to happen in the future. Because the demand for rice and for maize will keep increasing. In the case of rice, because the population will increase and will eat the same amount of rice that they eat now per capita. In the case of jagung, because both the population and the consumption per capita will increase. And Indonesia has made very clear many years ago that they want to be self-sufficient for both rice and jagung, and therefore the question is how we can get there. And basically there are two ways to produce more. So for a given demand of jagung or for a given demand of rice, there are different combinations of productivity and crop area that will take you there. On the one hand, you can produce very low yields, but you can have a very large area, or alternatively, you can have a very high yield in less land. And both combinations will give you the same amount of production. So the approach of increasing production by increasing area is called extensification. That means expansion of current cropland in other areas. The approach to increase production by increasing yields is called intensification. And there are many ways why we want to move with intensification. One is because with intensification you can produce more on the increase production, and then you don't need to encroach, for example, natural ecosystems such as peatlands or forests. Another way to see this is that with intensification you can focus resources and extension efforts on the area that is under cultivation currently, and you don't need to invest, for example, on new infrastructure or new irrigation schemes into new area and all the associated investments that are required. And also there is another good reason why we want to go with intensification rather than extensification, and is that typically the land in new areas has lower productivity compared with the land that is currently under production. So there are many good reasons why we want to go this way with intensification as a way to increase production rather than extensification. And here are some examples about on why we want to go with intensification rather than extensification. When you extensify the area, sometimes you go to ecosystems, to environments that are not really suitable for crop production, at least over the long term. And this is, for example, a picture that I took some years ago. This is paddy cocoa growing in uplands in Nusa Tenggara. And you can see there are all kinds of problems, including erosion, weed infestation, and so others. These are risky environments with low productivity, high climatic risk, and it's not necessarily the best environment where you want to grow rice. Here is another example. This is a tidal rice in Kalimantan. And again, this is a highly risky environment where farmers have little control on the water level. And therefore, they are not willing to invest too many inputs on this system. And perhaps more importantly, you can only grow one cycle of rice per year rather than two or three rice cycles that you can grow in better environments like Java. And at the same time that we are expanding our cropland into new environments that are more risky, we are losing our best rice because of cities taking over in the agricultural area that surrounds cities. And this is a picture of in which you can see cities taking over on paddy area in West Java. So as you can see, the overall picture is quite worrisome, because on the one hand, we are expanding our area into environments that have lower productivity and higher risk, and at the same time, we are losing our best rice and maize area that surrounds the city. And as I said before, this is very important, because if you compare, for example, irrigated rice versus tidal or upland rice, the productivity per crop cycle is about half of the one that you can achieve for irrigated rice. In other words, the rata productivitas of paddy in tidal or upland environments is less than half compared with the one that you can have in irrigated environments. But also, perhaps more importantly, the crop intensity is lower. You can likely grow 1, maybe 2 cycles of rice in swampy, tidal, or upland environments, while you can grow 2 and up to 3 in the case of irrigated rice. And when you can see, for example, what's the land requirement that is needed to substitute 1 hectare of land of rice area that is lost in Java, you need about 2 hectares or up to 4 hectares of upland rice to substitute 1 hectare of rice that is lost in West Java or in East Java. Bottom line is that it's very important to both intensify production on the cropland that we have now, but it's also important to have land use policies so that our best rice area is protected and we don't need, and we are not pushed to expand into environments that have lower productivity and higher risk. So the main question behind our project in Yagun and rice was whether or not intensification on existing cropland area defined as increasing yields can help Indonesia to meet the future production goals, with focus on Yagun and paddy. So this is a conceptual framework that we use for our project. You have here on the left hand this yield potential. The yield potential is the yield as determined by solar radiation, temperature, the cultivar, and in the case of rainfall crops, also by the rainfall and the soil properties that determine the soil water balance. So if you run an experiment and you have perfect control of diseases, insects, and you supply that crop with all the nutrients that the crop needs on time and on space, and then you go measure yield to that plot, then that will be something similar to the yield potential. Now, even in experiments, it's very difficult to get to the yield potential level because it requires perfection on crop management. So even in experiments, it's very difficult to get to yield potential, and you can imagine, therefore, how difficult it is in farmers' yields to get to the yield potential. And perhaps more importantly, usually you get to yield potential, you need a level of inputs that is just too high, too unsustainable, and probably not profitable. So we always say that reaching 70 to 80% of the yield potential is a more reasonable yield goal for farmers who want to maximize profit and maximize the return to the investments. So again, we are not proposing here that we should push farmers to arrive to the yield potential, but rather produce nearly 70 to 80% of the yield potential. And finally, what we find is that in farmers' fields, the rata productivitas is lower than that attainable yield because of poor fertility, because of management, because of diseases, and therefore we call that difference between the attainable yield and the average farm yield as the exploitable yield gap. So again, what we want to try to accomplish here is to make farmers to reach about 70 to 80% of the yield potential. And the difference between that attainable yield and the rata productivitas is what we call the exploitable yield gap, and that's what we want to close in this project. So again, our target is for farmers as a population to reach nearly 70 to 80% of the yield potential. So this starts from a global initiative that the University of Nebraska is leading. This is a global project that we call the Global Yield Gap Atlas, which is available through this website, www.yieldgap.org. And the website includes 70 countries and major food crops that currently account for nearly 90% of rice, maize, and wheat production. Sorry, rice, maize, and soybean production, and nearly 50% of the wheat production. The nice thing about the Atlas is that we estimated the yield potential and the yield gaps for all the crops and for all the countries using the same protocol based on a very strong agronomic understanding of each of the systems. So the Atlas allows to compare, for example, what are the yield gaps across different countries and across different crops. In the case of the yield gap for Indonesia, that was an initiative that started back in 2016. At that time, our goal was to estimate the yield potential and the yield gap for paddy and for jagung in Indonesia, and use that information to explore future scenarios on how Indonesia can reach self-sufficiency for both crops. And that was followed by a second phase in which we tried to understand what were the causes for yield gaps for both crops. This, as I said before, I am the one presenting here, but this is really a teamwork that includes our core team in Nebraska, that includes myself together with Gonzalo, and in the past, Juan Ignacio Ratolino Edreira, Jose Andrade, and Anyan Dien. And then in the case of the Indonesian Agency for Agricultural Research and Development, Litbang, included the group at the Indonesian Soil Research Institute, led by my good colleague, Professor Famudin Agus, but also, as you can see, many researchers from BPPADI and from the Indonesian Cereals Crop Research Institute. In the case of BPPADI, including Nurbulan Agustiani, in the case of Indonesian Cereals Crop Research Institute, Pak Syafruddin. But then also includes a large number of BPTP colleagues across more than 13 provinces across the archipelago. So again, as you can see, this is a project in which there was only a few bullets and a lot of Indonesians. And as I said before, this is a project that was done by Indonesians in Indonesia and for Indonesia. This is what we did first in this initial phase was to try to estimate what was the size of the yield gap. We were interested to know how much room exists to increase rice and jagung production on existing cropland area. And to do so, we selected a number of sites across the Indonesian archipelago that were representative of nearly 75% of the rice and maize area in the country. So as you can see, our sites include a large number of provinces, including North Sumatra, West Sumatra, South Sumatra, Lampung, Bentang, West, Central, and East Java, South Kalimantan, East and West Nusa Tenggara, South Sulawesi, Central Sulawesi, and Gorontalo. So our site selection, as you can see, covers a wide range of environments where rice and corn are grown across the archipelago. And what we did next was, and with the great help of our BPTP colleagues, was to try to retrieve all the information that we needed to estimate the potential for each of these sites. And to do so, we retrieved weather data from BMKG stations. We got information about the major soil types at each site from the current soil and land use maps developed by the Indonesian Soil Research Institute. And then we benefit from the great expertise from our BPTP colleagues across the provinces to provide us information about the most dominant crop sequences in each of the provinces where we selected sites. So as you can see in this example, on the right hand, you can see what were the most dominant crop sequences in each of for each of the provinces. And our aim was to try to estimate the yield potential and the yield gaps for each of these crop sequences in each of the provinces. So our efforts included quite a very diverse number of cropping systems, all the way from, for example, double irrigated irrigated double rice in Bentang and in West Java, triple rice in South Sulawesi. This is a picture that I took near Maros when I was there, where you can see a field that is about to be transplanted, and you can see there on the lower left corner the nursery. But also included very intensive maize systems. This is a picture taken near Grobogan in Jawa Tengah, and this is an example of upland maize, where three cycles of maize are grown on the same piece of land within 1 year. For each of these sites and for each of these systems, we use crop models to estimate the yield potential. So I'm not going to go into all the details, but basically crop models are mathematical equations, mathematical algorithms that try to capture the influence of environmental factors on crop physiological processes. And therefore, if you calibrate the model for a given variety or hybrid, then you can use that model to estimate what will be the yield potential for a given site according to the site-specific weather and soil type. In the case of jagung, we use the hybrid maize model. In the case of rice, we use the Orisa version 3 to estimate the yield potential. So again, we use crop models to estimate the yield potential for each of the sites. And we did this separately for rain-fed and for irrigated rice and maize. Now, something very important to do before using models is to calibrate the models to make sure that they work at estimating the yield potential.
Wah,
So
ini
we
tulisannya
spend a lot of
Trias
time with
resmi.
our colleague from from Lidman, trying to calibrate models to make sure that they work for Indonesia. And you can see here one of the first publications from the project, where we reported the first calibration for models done for maize and rice in Indonesia, which include researchers from BPPADI as well from the Indonesian Cereal Crops Research Institute in Maros. And what we did here was to calibrate the rice and hybrid maize models for the most dominant maize hybrids and rice inbred lines. And that was the sites that we used for calibrating the models. So once we were confident that the models work well at estimating the yield potential, what we did next was to use these same models and apply them to all the sites that we have selected before, and based on the local weather and soil type and the most dominant cropping system, estimate the yield potential for each of those sites. So this is a summary of our results for yield potential and for yield gaps. This is a screenshot that I took from the atlas, where you can see the yield potential estimated for irrigated rice across all the sites. And you can see that there is variation there. In some cases, the yield potential is around 7 to 8. In other cases, it's nearly 11 to 10 tons. But on average, the yield potential for rice in Indonesia is around 9.5 tons per hectare. This is at 13% moisture content. And considering the rata productivitas now, which is around 6 tons in the case of irrigated rice, then the current yield gap is around 3.5 tons per hectare, which means that the yield gap is nearly 37% of the potential. So in other words, farmers are on average, in the case of irrigated rice, 37% below their potential. This is the same, but for lowland rainfed rice, the yield potential is a bit lower compared with irrigated rice because of weather limitation, but perhaps more importantly, the rata productivitas for lowland rainfed rice is lower, and on average, farmers are nearly 50% of the potential. So as you can see, the current yield gap is larger for lowland rainfed rice compared with irrigated rice, indicating that there is an opportunity for Indonesia for producing more rice, especially if they focus in closing the yield gap in lowland rainfed environments. And again, this is lowland rainfed. This does not include upland rice or what you call paddy cocoa. Let's move now into Jagun. So this is the estimates of yield potential across the Indonesian archipelago. So you can see that there is variation across sites. So for example, if you look at favorable environments in North Sumatra or in Java, the yield potential could be up to 14, 15 tons per hectare. If you go to more water limited environments, then the yield potential is much lower. But on average, the yield potential for corn, for Jagun, is around 12 tons per hectare. The rata productivitas is 6.7, and sorry, this is for rainfed maize, and therefore the yield gap is about nearly half. So on average, a rainfed maize producer in Indonesia is producing less than half of what they can potentially produce, given the current weather and the current genetics. So as you can see, the yield gap for Jagun is much larger compared with the one for rice. Oh, I forgot to include the one for irrigated rice. Oh, for irrigated maize. Okay, fine. All this information on yield gaps for Jagun and for paddy has been documented and published in the top tier journals in agronomy. So this is a publication from 2018, published in Field Crops Research Journal, in which my good colleague Famudin Agus was the first author, but you can see that there is also a good number of colleagues from BPPADI and from PPTP that were included there as co-authors. So as you can see, in a world where we are all talking about international collaboration, I think that this is a good example about real collaboration across institutes from different parts of the world. So anyway, if you are interested to learn more about the yield gaps and the yield potential for maize and rice, I suggest you to look at this publication. Also, you can find all this detailed information on our website, and there is a section of the atlas where we describe all the work done for Indonesia, including all the sources of data and assumptions. And But as I said before, that was just the beginning of our collaboration in Indonesia. And we also expanded that collaboration to other countries. And something that was interesting for us to learn was how the yield gap for Indonesia compares with that for other countries in Southeast Asia, and what's the importance of increasing rice production, not only for Indonesia, but also for the rest of the region. So in the case, this is recent work that we published in Nature Food, where we estimate the yield potential and the yield gap for irrigated rice and lowland rainfall rice for the 6 major rice producing countries in the region, including Philippines, Vietnam, Thailand, Cambodia, Myanmar, and Indonesia. And we found that on average, the yield potential is 9 tons per hectare per crop, but it ranges from nearly 6 up to 10 tons per hectare, depending on the country. And in the case of lowland rainfall rice, the yield potential is lower, especially in the case of Thailand, where aromatic rice varieties with lower yield potential are being grown. So if you look at the map on the left hand for irrigated rice, you can see that in general, the yield gap is lower in the case, no, so sorry, this is the yield potential. So you can see the yield potential is pretty similar across the region. In the case of lowland rainfall rice, the yield potential is higher in Indonesia, Philippines, but it's lower, for example, in the case of Thailand, where there is more water limitation. So this is a map of yield gaps now. So this is the yield gap expressed as a percentage of the yield potential. So if there is green color, it means that the yield gap is small. If there is red color, it means that the yield gap is much larger. So as you can see, good news is that the yield gap for Indonesia is, and for Vietnam is smaller compared with other countries. So on average, an Indonesian or a Vietnamese farmer is getting to nearly 65% of the yield potential. In the case of farmers in Thailand, Myanmar, Cambodia, and Philippines, the yield gap is much larger, representing nearly half of the yield potential for those sites. So again, the main message for the region is that smaller gap for Indonesia and for Vietnam, larger gap for Thailand, Cambodia, Myanmar, and Philippines. Now, what does it mean for the future? Now, we all want to know what this means in terms of setting priorities for agricultural research and development and for orienting policy. So we did a scenario assessment in which we considered 3 scenarios of yield gap closure. In the first scenario was a business as usual, in which we basically assume that all these countries will just have the same rates of yield gains over the next 20 years. So no change in rice area and same rate of yield gain over the next 20 years. In the second scenario, we explore one in which there was full closure of the exploitable yield gap by 2040, so that all farmers in Southeast Asia will reach nearly 70 to 80% of the yield potential within the next 20 years. But again, closing the exploitable yield gap in only 20 years is quite optimistic and it's very difficult. So then we also explore a third scenario in which we consider half closure of the existing exploitable gap by 2040, which will be one scenario in which there is a higher and more explicit focus by governments to close the exploitable yield gap. And of course, all these scenarios rely on a number of assumptions that are detailed here at the bottom of the slide. But these are the main findings from our study for the region. Let me explain a little bit this very complicated figure. So at the top, you have 2 panels that shows the self-sufficiency ratio. This self-sufficiency ratio is basically the ratio between the demand for rice versus the consumption for rice. So if you are 1, means you are producing as much rice as you need. If you are above 1, it means you have a rice surplus. If you are below 1, it means you have a deficit and that you have to import rice. So as you can see in the baseline now, we have in the region 4 countries that produce a surplus of rice, including Cambodia, Myanmar, Thailand, and Vietnam. Then you have 1 country, Indonesia, that is very, very close to 1, in which the demand is very tight compared with the production. And then we have a net importer that imports a lot of rice, that is the Philippines. Now, what will happen in the future? And by the way, you can see here at the bottom, the rice surplus. In the case of Cambodia, Myanmar, Thailand, and Vietnam, there is a surplus. In the case of Philippines, there is a deficit. In the case of Indonesia, is near self-sufficiency, but is still relying on imports in some years. Now, what will happen in 20 years down the road? What's the scenario for year 2040? If we look at the business as usual, which is shown here with the red bars, you can see that if we just keep doing things as we are doing them now, that means no increase in the rice area and very little increase on average yields every year, then you can see that many countries are gonna need to import more rice, as the case of the Philippines or Indonesia, or won't have any room for export rice, as it is the case of Myanmar. And the whole region as a whole is gonna be self-sufficient, but it's not gonna have a surplus of rice that can be exported. So if we just keep doing things the way that we are doing them now, Southeast Asia will not be able to export too much rice to other parts of the world. And two countries in the region, Indonesia and Philippines, will need to import more rice than what they are doing now. So we don't want that. So then let's explore a scenario in which there is a full closure of the yield gap. In a scenario in which all the farmers in Southeast Asia will close the exploitable gap within the next 20 years, you can see that all the countries in the region, including Indonesia and the Philippines, will have a self-sufficiency ratio above 1, which means that they will have a rice surplus, and therefore they won't need to rely on imports. And the whole region will have a large surplus of rice that can be exported to other parts of the world. Now, as I said before, closing the exploitable yield gap in only 20 years is very challenging and very difficult, and probably is unlikely. So a more realistic scenario will be one in which there is 50% of yield gap closure, which is shown here with the green bars. And on that scenario, you can see that all the countries in the region, except for Philippines, will be able to be self-sufficient, and the whole region as a whole will be able to double the amount of rice surplus, maintaining the current capacity to export rice to the other part of the world. So again, the main message is that with a 50% closure of the current yield gap, Indonesia can be self-sufficient for rice and even have a small surplus that can be exported to other parts of the world. But to do that, it's important to increase the current rate of yield gain. So if we want Indonesia to, for example, close the current exploitable gap by 50%, that will require rates of yield gains that are much faster than now. Current rates of yield gain for rice in Indonesia is quite low, is nearly 20 kilos or even less per year. And if we want to close the yield gap by half by year 2040, then we will need to triple that current rate to up to 50 kilos of hectare per year. So our target, if we want to, if Indonesia wants to be self-sufficient, will be to accelerate our current rates of yield gain for rice and be able to increase our rata productivity for paddy at about 50 kgs per hectare per year. If we can increase our current yields by that, then we are good. If we are less than that, then that means that we are going to struggle to reach self-sufficiency for rice, or it means that we are going to need to expand our area into many other environments such as tides or swamps or uplands. But we all know that that requires a lot of investments, and that the productivity in these new environments is lower and higher risk. So there are many reasons why we would like to see Indonesia investing more on research on rice, so that we can accelerate our current rates of yield gains and make sure the country will be self-sufficient for rice by year 2040. All this information has been published in major journals. So this is an example of a very recent papers published early this year in Nature Food, which includes researchers from Litban or from BRIN now. And again, once we discovered that there is a yield gap for jagun and for rice, the next question was, okay, what are the causes behind the yield gaps? We want to know what are the reasons for the yield gap, so therefore we can do something in order to close the yield gap. Is the yield gap related with fertility? Is the yield gap related with poor management? Is it related with the insects, weeds, pathogens, or something else? So we started a second phase in which we focus on a number of provinces across the archipelago, where we try to understand what were the causes for the yield gaps. And we selected provinces that were representative of nearly 50% of the maize area and 70% of the rice area. And at each of these provinces, we focus on the most important cropping system. So for example, in the case of Jawa Tengah, we focus on rice-maize systems. In the case of Gorontalo, double maize. In the case of South Sulawesi, on triple rice and double upland maize. Or in the case of, for example, South Sumatra, on tidal rice. So We basically focus 13 provinces, and in each province, we focus on the main cropping system. This is a survey that we ran across 100 farmers in each of these provinces. So this was a survey run by our BPTP colleagues located in each of these provinces. And we asked farmers to report information about yield and management practices, as well as apply inputs. And the way we did this was by organizing workshops where we train our colleagues from BPTP, which they also train enumerators at each provinces, which they organized gatherings with the farmers where we requested all the information that we needed. And then after a meeting with the farmer to retrieve all the information, then we went to the fields, we collect the GPS coordinates of the field that was surveyed. So we were completely sure that we know the field size, and therefore we can estimate the yield and the apply inputs with precision. And you can see here some pictures of our BPTP colleagues in some of the provinces, like for example, Fina here in Jawa, Tengah. This is an example about some of the analysis that we conducted with the data. So this is an example for tidal rise in in Sumatera Selatan. In this case, this is called a regression tree analysis. I'm not going to go into the details behind the analysis, but basically this is a non-traditional statistical method in which you try to parse out the different sources of variation. The way to read a regression tree is from the top to the bottom. So the most important variables will be at the top, and the less important ones at the bottom. But having said that, if there is a variable that appears in the regression tree, that means that that variable is important as explained in the yield gap. So in the case of tidal rise in South Sumatra, we found that the season was the most important factor explaining yield variation and yield gaps across farmers' fields. But within each of the seasons, the late wet and the wet, then we found that nutrients were very important at explaining the field variation, in particular the case of phosphorus and the case of potassium. Fields that receive a larger amount of potassium and phosphorus have comparably larger yields compared with those that received less amounts of nutrients. So again, this is an example of the analysis that we did for one province, but we did this for each of the provinces. And this is as a figure that summarizes the analysis that we did for all the 12 countries where we operated. So on the vertical axis, you can see the different factors that can potentially explain the yield gap, including nutrients, pests, establishment, cultivars, and damage, for example, by hail, by rats, or by other things. And then you can see the number of times these variables appear across provinces as important factors explaining the yield gaps. And you can see nutrients is at the top, and it has 100%, which means that across all the provinces, we found nutrients to be important at explaining the yield gap. Now, then you can see other variables that appears in some provinces to be important at explaining the yield gaps, but not in other provinces. So, for example, pest control, establishment, cultivars was important in some cases, but not in all provinces. And then finally, we found that, for example, things like rat damage or other things that farmers tend to report all the time, they were not so important to explain the yield gaps. So one of the main messages from our analysis is that nutrients is at the top of the list when it's about trying to understand the current yield gap. All right, so in Gonzalo, by the way, Gonzalo, the next presentation is going to elaborate more about what we found in relation to nutrients. Okay, so I want to summarize the findings of these very long 7-8 years of collaborative research with Litman and with BRIN now. First of all, good news. Good news is that Indonesia has room to increase production on existing cropland. We found that on average, the yield gap is 37% for irrigated rice, 48% for lowland rice, and about 50% for jagun. So there is room for increasing yields, and there is room for Indonesia to produce more paddy and jagun on existing cropland. Now, the not so good news is that with the current rates of yield gains, it's going to be difficult to get there. So Indonesia needs to increase or accelerate the rate at which yields are increasing, and that will require more investments on research and extension so that we can enable that intensification. And we know that if we are able to close the yield gap by half, that will be enough for Indonesia to become self-sufficient for rice on existing cropland and with existing water resources. But as I said before, that will require faster rates of yield gain, around 50% of kgs of rice per year per hectare. And we are now working to establish what the causes of the yield gaps are. And we found that inadequate plant nutrition, and especially in the case of potassium, seems to be a strong candidate to explain the yield gaps. And Gonzalo's presentation is going to explain more about that. But I want to also make sure that I give the right impression here that this was not just a research project. I think that through this project between University of Nebraska and with BPTP colleagues, with Pepe Paddy and with Leadbank and now with BRIN, we have also opened the door for a much wider, a much broader collaboration that also led to other interesting projects in the case of Indonesia. So our initial work on Paddy and Jagun also led us to other projects in Indonesia on sawit, in which we also tried to estimate what were the yield gaps and the causes for the yield gaps for sawit. In the case of sawit, that was a project that in which we partnered with PPKS, with the Indonesian Oil Palm Research Institute, together with colleagues from the Indonesian Soil Research Institute, now in BRIN, and also colleagues from universities. And in this project in sawit, we work across 6 provinces: Riau, Jambi, Sumatra Selatan, and Kalimantan Barat, Tengah, and Timur. And this also led to an important publication that was released in Nature Sustainability, which we made the case that intensification can help Indonesia to reconcile production and environmental goals. And we show that closing the current yield gaps in oil palm, together with a more targeted expansion into low carbon environments, can help Indonesia to produce more CPO and at the same time protect peatlands and rainforests, which is a great message for Indonesia and for the rest of the world. Also, our collaboration with Leadbank and now with BRIN led to a lot of opportunities for researchers. And we have the great pleasure to host many researchers from Leadbank and now BRIN in Nebraska. So in this case, you can see a picture that was taken, I think, nearly in 2018 or 19, where we have a group of 4 researchers from consisting of Wulan Agustiani, Fina, Sari, and Dwi, that they were with us for a whole month in Nebraska, and we put together a couple of papers that were eventually published. Also, later on in 2019, we received Ibu Siti from Sumatra Utara, and also Professor Famuin Aus. And also something that was very interesting from this collaboration is that it really helped to connect Indonesian researchers with a much broader network of researchers all over the world. So this was a recent publication in Nature Communications, in which we did a global analysis of yield gaps for rice that included researchers from all over the world, and including 3 researchers from Indonesia. And this paper was highlighted in many websites, in many important portals. But what I want to highlight here is that this kind of research included people from more than 13 institutions, and Indonesian researchers were part of this research. So nowadays we are all talking about collaboration, about global networks, and I think that our project is a good example about what a global network should be, and also it's a good example about how a modest investment on research can lead to a collaboration that leads to very high-profile publications and to information that is very important to orient and to prioritize agricultural research into BRIN. And now probably many people are thinking about how to invest and how to orient the research. And I think that sometimes we tend to believe that we need to create new things and we don't look too much on what we have now. But I want to tell you that we have now a very excellent collaboration with Leadbank and now with BRIN that we hope to maintain in the future, and we also hope to count with your collaboration and with your support to maintaining looking forward. So again, we already have a great group of collaboration. We already have a great existing collaboration, and we really hope that we can maintain that in the future under the umbrella of BRIN. That's it. Thank you very much. I want to thank again to the organizers, and I'm going to now give the chance to the next presenter to elaborate more about the causes for yield gaps with more focus on nutrients. Thank you very much. And again, very happy to be back in Indonesia. And I hope that, as I said before, we really look forward to keep our collaboration in our research under the umbrella of BRIN for many, many more years. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Patricio. It's very interesting presentation. Yeah, there is some data that you have been presented, like the yield potential of rice is in Indonesia is nearly the same with the yield potential that got in research field level. We are a breeder, have releasing some varieties that the yield potential in the description varieties is almost the same with the yield potential with the model. So it means that it's very good news for us as a breeder. And also there is some three scenarios that you have proposed, and based on the scenario one is very dangerous because I think most of the rice producer country like Thailand and Vietnam and Myanmar also will hold its production because of the pandemic and of the recent situation now. So I think the most reasonable one is scenario number 3, half 15% to reach the yield gap. So I think it's very interesting. Maybe some of the participants will be asked you more, and please hold your question, or you can write your question in the chat, and or you can also raise your hand after the next two speaker. So let us move to the other speaker, Gonzalo. Gonzalo, are you there?
Yes,
okay.
I will share my screen now.
Okay. Before Gonzalo deliver his speak,
you see the
so I will
presentation, right?
I will read his CV.
Yes. Can you hear me properly too?
Yeah. I saw your presentation, but I will read the biography of the speaker. Dr.
Okay.
Gonzalo is PhD candidate from
I see. Sorry.
University of Nebraska Lincoln.
Stop sharing.
His nationality is Uruguay. His expertise on agricultural engineering, agricultural science, agronomy, crop production, and statistics. There is a lot of publication he has been made regarding to his expertise, of course, mostly in agronomy. So, Gonzalo, you have 20 minutes to deliver your speak. Time is yours.
Perfect. Thank you, Shristria. Give me 1 second. I will share the screen now. Good. Okay. So can everybody see my screen? Yeah, and can hear me too, right? Perfect. So well, thank you very much again, Shristria, for the introduction. Now, as Patricia said, I will share this story that will focus in the story in nutrients, and we entitled this story "Evidence of Widespread Potassium Deficiencies in Intensive rice maize cropping system of Southeast Asia. And by this title, I am already giving an insight about which will be our conclusion, right? So I will start with the question about where is potassium likely to be deficient, or where potassium deficiencies are likely to occur. Well, we know that to have potassium deficiencies, we have to have at least one of those, a combination or one of those characteristics. We have to have high yielding crops that has a very large potassium removal. For example, those oil crops like soybean that has a high potassium concentration in the grain, or those crops that has a high amounts of biomass removal, like forage crops or silage crops. And then in the case of rice, we know that there is not much potassium in the grain, but the cereal stover has a really high concentration of potassium. So, and we know that in Southeast Asia, it's very common, very popular that the farmers tend to remove the stover from the field. So if this is combined with soil that has a really low potassium supply capacity, like those soils that have clay type 2-1, or if those systems are receiving small potassium inputs, like the farmer is applying low rates of potassium, or the irrigation water have a low potassium concentration, or for example, the rainwater also does not a huge contribution on potassium. So if we have a combination of those characteristics, it's likely that we will see potassium deficiencies. So our goal was to investigate to which degree potassium may be limiting crop yields in intensive rice maize cropping system in the humid tropics. But we focus our story in Indonesia. So we take the example of rice maize systems of Indonesia as a case of study. And we focus our study into Indonesia in 10 provinces that I am highlighted here in red, all of them across Indonesia. And together, they account, as Patricia said too, about 50% of the maize area and 70% of the rice area. And you can see those provinces match pretty well with the rice and maize area that I am highlighting in the inset. Green is the rice area and the red is the maize area. So across the Indonesia, or across those provinces, we have run a survey, and I am highlighting in red those red dots. The green dots represent areas in which we have surveyed farmers, and areas in which we have sampled leaf nutrient concentration. Then we had access to a long-term field experiment highlighted here in purple, location of the Sugamandi experiment that Susie has kindly shared with us, all of those very rich data. And then in yellow and red, I'm highlighting locations where we had access to on-farm fertilizer trials that Ronald Boresh, Thomas Overton, Christian Witt, and other researchers from Erie have shared with us too. So as you can see, we compile a variety of sources of data and to merge it and develop this story. So to combine all those different kinds of data, we follow 4 approaches. Approach 1 was based on the farmer survey data. We calculated nutrient mass balances for each crop on a sequence and then integrated over the sequence. So we have the balances for the year. Second approach was to run a nutrient status diagnosis based on leaf tissue analysis, and we run those analyses through, or those samplings through, a subset of our provinces across Indonesia. Third approach was to analyze the data from the long-term experiment of Susiana Susanti, and finally we jump into the fourth approach, that was to make an analysis of the on-farm fertilizer trials. So I will present the story in the same order: approach 1, approach 2, 3, and 4. So our results from the approach 1, or the nutrient mass balances per crop, I'm showing this figure that has 6 panels arranged in two columns. 1 column for rice in the left and 1 column for maize in the right. Then the 3 nutrients: nitrogen in the top, phosphorus in the middle, and potassium in the bottom. Then in the horizontal axis, we have the different provinces for which we have the data. And then in the vertical axis, the balances. Into each panel, there is a horizontal red line that highlights the zero balance. Okay, so I will start with nitrogen, the top. As you can see, these are box plot, and these boxes shows the first quantile and the third quantile. So these boxes describe the distribution of the data. So as you can see, for all the provinces, for rice and maize, you can see that all the boxes are above the zero balance. So this means that the balances for nitrogen were positive. And when we look at phosphorus, again, all the boxes are above the zero balance. So that means that farmers are applying more phosphorus than what they remove. But when we look at the bottom, potassium, the story is different. All the boxes are below the zero balance, which means that farmers are removing more than what they are applying, or what they have as inputs. So why? I already tell you a little bit why it's happening, but why this is happening indeed? Well, as you can see here in the right, I am showing the amounts the amount of nitrogen and phosphorus for rice and maize. As you can see, farmers are applying more than what they are removing. In the case of nitrogen, for example, they are above 140 or 170, and they are applying and they are removing less than that. But when we look at potassium, they are applying just 31 or 35 kilograms of potassium either for rice or maize, but the removal with the grain plus the stover is more than that. It's 45 or 48 or 75 kilograms per hectare per year. So this explains those very negative potassium balances. So this was per crop. And what happened if we look at the sequence? We know that the farmers tend to have at least 1 rice, but sometimes 2, sometimes 3, or sometimes 2 rice plus 1 maize. So if we integrate those balances through the sequence, so here I'm showing 3 panels, one for nitrogen, in the middle 1 for phosphorus, and in the right 1 for potassium. The different colors of the boxes represent the crop sequence. So the red means the upland double maize, the green represents the tidal just single rice, the blue represents the lowland double rice system, and the purple the lowland double rice plus 1 maize. So Again, we have in the horizontal axis the provinces, and in the vertical axis, this time the annual nutrient balances. So summing, integrating the balances for all the crops. There, and again, we have a red line, in this case, a dashed red line highlighting the zero balance. So when we look at nitrogen, all the boxes are really above the zero balance. So very positive balances. Some provinces even higher than 2 kilograms per hectare per year. And in the case of phosphorus, again, above the, I mean, positive, in some cases, very positive phosphorus balances. And when we look at the potassium, very negative potassium balances. Some provinces with averages that are lower than minus 100 kilograms per hectare per year. So there is a really intense mining of potassium in some systems. So when we look at this analysis, this picture, we say, okay, so those are the balances. This is what we see based on surveys. But what happened in the field? What happened if we go to the field and take samples of leaf? So can we see balances, or for some reason can we see the deficiencies, or for some reason crops are okay? So what we did was to run some surveys, to run some leaf sampling and measure the nutrient concentration. So here I'm showing again a figure that has 6 panels, 2 columns, one in the left for rice and in the right for maize. And in the horizontal axis, the provinces, and in the vertical axis, the leaf nutrient concentration. The top panels are for nitrogen. In the middle are the balances are the nutrient concentration for phosphorus, and the bottom potassium. In each panel, this time the red line means the critical level. I mean, it's the average of critical level based on all published critical levels available elsewhere. So as you can see, I will start again from nitrogen through phosphorus and potassium. As you can see, most of the provinces, or I would say all the provinces for nitrogen in rice crop are above the critical level. So we would say that they are okay. In the case of maize, 3 out of 5 provinces are above the sufficiency range, but 2 are still below that critical level. So there are some deficiencies there. In the case of phosphorus, for rice, either rice or maize, most of the provinces are well above the critical level. So no deficiencies for phosphorus. But our concern was potassium. And when we see at potassium, you can see that most of the provinces are below the critical level for high either rice or maize yields. So indeed, we found those widespread potassium deficiency for rice and for maize when we collect leaf samples on around andesis for both crops. So then we went to see the evidence from the long-term experiment that you have here, and that Ibu Susi is managing and leading. And when we look at those, after those 40 subsequent rice crops, let me explain a little bit this figure that is complex. Here I'm showing in the vertical axis the accumulated yield, in the horizontal axis the number of consecutive crops. Okay, so I'm showing just 3 treatments from the long-term experiment. The red is the 0 or the control without any nutrient application. Then we have the plus MP has an average rate of nitrogen of 131 kilograms per hectare and 26 kilograms of phosphorus per hectare. Those are in element basis. And then we have in purple, the plus NPK treatment that has the same amounts for nitrogen and phosphorus, but they also have 94, on average, 94 kilograms of potassium per hectare. When we look at this picture, well, we see that there is a linear increase in the accumulated yield over time for the zero balances, for the control treatment. And there is a huge response to nitrogen and phosphorus. As you can see, the accumulated yield when we apply nitrogen and phosphorus is much higher than the one that doesn't have any nitrogen or phosphorus. But when we apply also potassium, it's interesting because we have to wait for 10 to 12 crops to start seeing an interesting response to potassium. And then there is an increasement on the response to potassium among those remaining 30 crops. Here, what I am saying is highlighted in this inset that shows the cumulative yield difference between the NPK minus the NP. And you can see that at the beginning there is little response, but there is a huge response after this lag period. And at the end of those 40 crops, so now we have a cumulative yield loss by the omission of potassium of 20 tons per hectare, which means an average of a half ton per crop. And this half ton per crop is equal or is about 1/3 of the current exploitable yield gap for rice in Indonesia. And so we have here an interesting insight that, well, potassium is indeed one of those factors that can help us narrow this yield gap in Indonesia. And we went a step further with our fourth approach by analyzing data from on-farm fertilizer trials. So I will start from the left to the right, all right? And in the A panel, so I'm showing the yield response, which is the plus NP minus the plus NPK minus the plus NP. So the response to potassium, right? Yield response to potassium. And this is the cumulative frequency. That is the relative, the frequency of fields that has response in this database of on-farm trials. So we have that about 80% of the fields had a positive response. So here, this line highlights separate those fields that does not respond to those that do respond to potassium. So 80% of fields respond. When we account for the cost of the fertilizer, the potassium fertilizer, and the price of either the rice or maize, we have that 70% of those farmers had a positive increase in the net profit. So they made more money, or they could make more money by applying potassium. But when we look at this third panel that shows the return on investment, the return on investment is a measurement of how likely would be for a farmer to have a really interesting return to this investment. And a threshold of 1 is like a rule that we can say that if a farmer has a return on investment of 1, it will be likely that this farmer will adopt this technology. But if it is lower, the farmer will will be not much willing to apply to adopt this technology. And what we saw is that there is a 50-50. I mean, 50% of the farmer will be likely to adopt because they will have a really interesting return on investment, but half of them will be in a position that they will be doubting about if adopt it or not, because so this is an overview of the story I had to share, and I would like to conclude this story by pointing some conclusions. So we had that the partial nutrient balances were positive for nitrogen and phosphorus, but negative for potassium. The leaf nutrient concentration was above the critical level for nitrogen and phosphorus in the case of rice, but deficient for potassium in most cases. In the case of maize, nitrogen was deficient for some provinces. The long-term experiment showed that the yield gap due to potassium increases slowly over time and can help explain up to 1/3 of the current exploitable yield gap. On-farm trials showed consistent increase in yield and net profit, but low return on investment, which prevent the widespread adoption of this technology. And closing the potassium gap will require increasing either more inputs or changes in the straw management. So now that we have applied and put different sources of data and try to analyze them and try to connect the different insights coming from the different approaches, we are thinking on moving towards solutions, right? Because, well, we already saw that there is an interesting problem here with potassium. We already had evidence that this problem is real here. So we started thinking on possible solutions that we should check and we should consider in a next step to move toward solutions. And one easy idea or thing to check will be to make an irrigation water sampling across provinces, because this water, we believe that the water maybe an interesting contribution of potassium for some fields, and maybe one way to discriminate fields that would have an increase, an interesting return on investment from those that we don't have. Other interesting idea would be to have some pilots, to have some plots in some villages, across the country, and to test different fertilizer strategies. And for example, what the farmers do, or a fertilization based on balances, or something hybrid. I mean, something based on balances, but also considering I mean, when farmers are over applying nitrogen, as we saw in the balances, or when farmers are over applying phosphorus, well, just cut by 10%, 20% the investment on nitrogen and phosphorus, and reinvest that on potassium. So they will be not depending more, do not spend more money, but redirecting it to another nutrient. So this would be an idea. I mean, to have some pilots to check which would be the best strategy to solve this problem. And if we can do that, we could arrive to some simple rules that may can help us to classify fields or identify fields that will respond to potassium from those that will not respond to potassium, and that they are already okay. So thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much for your time and for having us here. So Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much, Gonzalo. It's a very interesting presentation. You mentioned that potassium is very crucial to increasing the yield, because the other nutrient like nitrogen and phosphorus is not become a problem, but potassium is crucial to be used for increasing the yield. So since the potassium is the most expensive fertilizer, maybe it's very difficult also to implement it, and we will discuss later. I think some of the participants also have a question, but before we start the discussion, there is still another speaker, Ibu Susiana Susanti. Is okay. Can you provide me the biography of Ibu Susi? Okay. I will read the biography of Ibu Susi. Bu Susiana Susanti, he's a researcher of the Research Center for Food Crop of Research of Organization of Agriculture and Food of BRIN. Recently, his PhD is in he got in University of Queensland, Australia. His expertise is in agronomy, soil science, physiology, plant physiology, and nutrition. There are many publications that has been published, and the important thing, she is also in charge the long-term fertility experiment in Sukamandi. This experiment is, I think, this is the longest fertility experiment in Southeast Asia after fertility experiment in Los Baños at Erie. So in this Ibu Susi will deliver about long-term fertility experiment for irrigated rice in West Java, Indonesia, combination with organic acid and a chemical fertilizer to improve yield and soil fertility. Ibu Susi, you have 20 minutes and your time is yours.
Thank you, Bapak Moderator. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. The Honorable Chairman of Research Organization for Agriculture and Food, and also Bapak Dr. Yudhistira, the Head of Research Center for Food Crop, and of course this our two guest keynote speaker, Professor Patricio and also Gonzalo. Ladies and gentlemen, may I start to share screen, please? I think I will just, okay. This one. Bisa ya? Can I think. I think it's, I need to, iya, nggak bisa ini. Dua kali klik ya. Ini. Okay. Thank you. So there's a great opportunity for us here, BRIN at Sukamandi, to share with our two experts from the University of Nebraska and Lincoln about long-term fertility trial. I would like to emphasize the combination of NPK fertilizer, that's inorganic one, and then we a little bit change the subplot treatment of our long-term fertility combined with the organic to improve the growth, yield of rice, and also soil fertility at irrigated area. So this is the long-term fertility located in Indonesian Center for Rice Research. I want to show this field condition because unfortunately, Professor Gracini and Gonzalo, you are here, but we just harvested our experiment. So we have 4 replications. So this is replication 1, and then we also the replication 2, replication 3, and replication 4. So we have 6 inorganic fertilizer. So we have site-specific nutrient management. And also plus NP, plus NK, plus NPK, control, and also plus PK. So in 1994-95 wet season until 2009 wet season, we have 6 fertilizer treatments, and then the subplot was 2 varieties. Yeah, we have 2 inbred variety. In 1994 to 95 until 2009, we apply 50 kg of potassium, 50 kg of phosphor, and then 100 kg of potassium. So that's a high doses of fertilizer. And then so before we just have in 1994 we just divided the main plot into 2 subplot only. So it's like this one. So the condition is not like on the photo. But then started in 2009-2010 wet season until 2017, we have 6 fertilizer treatment. And then for the doses of phosphor and kalium, we start to decrease it. So for the phosphor, we only have 15. And then for potassium, we have 50. So that's a decrease compared to the first phase of the LTFA. And then starting 2017 wet season until now, 2022, we have 6 fertilizer treatment, and then we change the subplot from the 3 varieties. 3 varieties like we have inbred, hybrid rice, and also ideal plant type. So we have 3 different morphology, variety with different morphology. So starting in 2017, we think that we need to change the variety into organic fertilizer. So we would like to know whether the combination of inorganic and organic fertilizer will maintain the soil fertility or improve the soil fertility. So this is the fertilizer treatment, like what I said in my previous slide. So we have site-specific nutrient management that's based on the soil pH status and also soil potassium status. Organic fertilizer, we made our own organic fertilizer. So we have 5-ton fermented straw. So it's not like just straw, and we move out the straw from the field. And then we decompose the straw outside the field, and then return it to the field about a week before final land preparation, before planting time. We also have 2 tons per hectare manure that's from cattle, a dog of cattle. We have 2 tons per hectare. It's also fermented manure. So the quality of the manure is, I think that's very good one compared to fertilizer produced by a company. And then also we still have treatment, control treatment without organic fertilizer. So I think it's good for us to know the indigenous nutrient supply. So thank you very much for your presentation, because we have problem with the nitrogen application, especially at farmer field, because usually they tend to apply excessive doses of nitrogen. It's quite difficult for us to to change how to, yeah, I think that's a great idea, Gonzalo. If we able to decrease to reduce the amount of nitrogen and then buy the money for potassium fertilizer. So we have 140 nitrogen for our experiment because of this one. So we established an attainable target yield. In Sukamandi, that's about 7 to 8 ton. And then we also have used the grain yield from the plot without any nitrogen, to use it. And then actually this is the one that we measure the doses. It's just how the increased yield respond for the nitrogen. That's in Sukamandi, that's about 2 to 3 ton per hectare. I think that so we just apply, we count the doses of nitrogen to meet the crop needs at about 7 to 8 ton per hectare. So this is the our target is about 7 to 8, and then the plot without fertilizer is about 7 to 5. So we at about 2 to 3 ton per hectare by applying nitrogen, and then that's the fertilizer we need about 120 to 144. So that's one of the reason the nitrogen doses we never change it, so that's 140. So actually in Indonesia, compound fertilizer NPK Ponska, that's become very popular, but for this experiment we still use single fertilizer, so urea, SP36, and then also KCl for potassium source. This is, I'm invite you, Gonzalo, for having so nice graphic and then analyze things very nice. So I think I just tried to compare the grain yield. This is in 94 to 95. So that's quite easy for us to get more than 7 ton per hectare. Here, in 94-95 wheat season, we have a good result, and also even for AR64, the popular variety, also for S969, this is one of the line at the time, 94. Well, I wasn't here yet. 94, yeah. So this is Professor Sarlan Abdurrahman who responsible for this experiment. We got easily to get high yield, except for 95 dry season. That's because of pests and diseases, and also for the 98 dry season, that's because of the pests and diseases. But recently, I would like to compare it between the result in 94 and the result in 2017. I mean the recent condition, the current condition of field at Sukamandi. We only got like 5 ton. That's the highest one. We got it in 2019 wet season, because we only have one season in 2019. We have problem with water at that time. So in a 1 year, usually we have 2 seasons, but especially specific for 2019, we only have 1 season. So we got about 7. But if you see, that's very, very low, because in 94 for the plot without nitrogen, that's indigenous nutrient supply, existing supply there, we can get about 5 ton. Even in 95, 96 wet season, we have above nearly 5.5 ton per hectare. That's without any fertilizer. And now recently we even have 5.5 ton for the full fertilizer. So that's the condition of recent condition at the field. That's one of the reason we decided to change the subplot treatment from 3 varieties into organic fertilizer. So we hope that our hypothesis is if we combine between inorganic and organic, then we will able to maintain the soil fertility by adding organic fertilizer, but at the same time we still need to apply for inorganic fertilizer to maintain the yield. That's one of the reason. And well, I actually take the advantage for having both of you here and also with my friend, because this is a trend, the condition in Sukamandi, that we usually have higher yield at the wet season. So that's quite different compared to other places in Indonesia, because in general, like in Jogja, I believe Professor Grasini, you've been to Jogja before. And so in Jogja or in other places of Indonesia, they usually have higher grain yield during the dry season because maybe high solar radiation and so on. But in Sukamandi, actually before in 94, 95, we have higher degree, that's constant higher degree during the wet season. And then after the soil fertility, let's say, decrease, then that phenomena is not occur anymore. So we only have nearly the same result between dry season and wet season. So this is response to phosphor fertilizer. I want to compare between 94, 95 to 2000 into 2017 to 2021. In 94, 95, the response is very low, even quite similar. So plus NP and then plus N, this is quite similar result. But after about 20 years, and then we still always using chemical fertilizer, then the response is significantly higher. That's become 2017 and then 2021. So yeah, we apply the, this is B2. Yeah, 50 kg, 94 to about 20 dry season. Yeah, the year 1994 to 2000 dry season, and then we that's not K2O. They're supposed to be P. Yeah. You're very detailed. Sorry. Yeah, yeah. So the response to phosphor significantly increase. Here the response to potassium fertilizer before in 94, the quite similar to phosphor, that it's also not so high, except for starting in 1990 to 2000, that's high also, and then also in 2018. This is the application, because the application in 1994 to 2000 was 100 kg per hectare, and then after that we apply only half of it, about 50 kg per hectare. But in our long-term experiment, we did not really remove all the straw. So usually we just cut off, so the stubble, the remaining straw at the field from previous season is about 25 to 30 centimeters above ground. So that could be also the source of the potassium. Usually during the land preparation, we usually have about 3 weeks for the land preparation. So they just mix the remaining straw at the field with soil during the land preparation. So that's also source of K from water irrigation. That last time we also analyzed the water irrigation. Oh, this is something that if we collect all the data, we know that usually in like 2018 dry season, the pests and diseases was very high. We managed the pests and diseases, but the infestation of pests and diseases was high, especially for stem borer and also for brown plant hopper. So we usually have more response for potassium during that condition. So if the pests and disease is very high, that plot give us better grain yield compared to other season. So this is we use Oriza 2000 as well, and I was very happy from Professor Grassini presentation that you mentioned that the average, the potential average yield in Indonesia, that's about 9.5. That I wish that in the future Indonesia will be able to really narrow or close the gap, and we get 9.5 ton per hectare. That will be very great for us. Because actually in our analysis as well, that the potential grain yield in Sukamandi, that's also 10 ton, nearly 10 ton per hectare. We have different potential between dry season and wet season. So in here, dry season should be higher, more than 10 ton per hectare. However, we get even less than 40% from the potential one. And 96 or 98, in 96, 97, we have better yield at the field, but it's still below 80% of the potential yield. So that's for the wet season. We sometimes get even nearly close to 100% of yield potential. That's the result of our analysis for the long-term fertility. Oh, I'm sorry, this is also still in Indonesian language. So this is our soil analysis for each plot. So this is the average of for replication. So here in the plus NK. So without phosphor, the P2O5, the content of the soil is also decreased, only 36 milligram per 100 gram. So this is very different compared to the plus PK1. So we always apply phosphor and potassium for years, and then the uptake is very low because there is no nitrogen there. So there is accumulation of P and K at that plot. And this is for plus NP. We also have very low K potential. There's only 27, 22. That's also very different. Very different compared to the plus PK plot. And I got the soil analysis at the beginning of long-term fertility. The pH was about 5.8 to 6.5. So the pH at the beginning of 1994, that's nearly normal. But now we got only 5.0, 5.2. We still get 6 on SSNM plot, but yeah, mostly that's less than 5.5. So I think that's also one of the reason we want to change the subplot with the organic fertilizer. This is the result of our organic fertilizer made by ourselves. So I think the quality was good. Even For the manure, that's very good one. It's just the N is nitrogen. It's 2.52. For the compost 2.52, and for the manure there's 4.002. So that's very high compared to other organic fertilizer. I think this one. Oh, I choose this one. Something that in the end of my presentation, I would like to show a video to see the condition of our long-term fertility trial. And the easiest way to see the effect of the organic fertilizer is by counting and see the number of tiller. That's completely different between. So they significantly decrease in the number of tiller under plus PK treatment. So the red one, this one, that is the lowest one. And then now it's easy to understand why our farmers really like to apply excessive use of nitrogen, because even in our experiment, for the number of tiller, we can group it into two. The first group with number of tiller with an application. Of course, we got a lot of number of tiller, but then without an application, it's significantly decreased. So that's the comparison between plus NK. So this deficient of phosphor without organic fertilizer. So the number of tiller was very low, less than 10 tiller, and then also it's like kind of stunting. So the effect of the deficiency of phosphor is very obvious. And then also this is plus NK, the omission of P, with 5 ton fermented straw, 5 ton compost per hectare. And here the plus NK, omission P with the 2 ton per hectare of manure. So I think that is very significant, because the quality of the organic fertilizer as well. So straw could be the cheapest source of potassium, but the quality of straw is still not as good as compost from the manure. Oh, okay. I don't know if it's not. I supposed to. Okay, so this is the condition of our. It's supposed to video. Yeah. So this is if you see the very green, it's like dark green. That's the deficient of phosphor. So we don't apply phosphor in that area, and you see that's also the very thin, that's without fertilizer. So I think the effect of different fertilizer in our long-term fertility is very obvious, and then not just for the performance of the plant, but also from the soil analysis, and also for the tissue analysis as well. For the uptake of phosphor and uptake of potassium, that's also very different. This is the condition of our long-term fertility. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ibu Susiana. Very interesting study you have been done in Sukamandi. I think your experiment is related with Gonzalo and also with Professor Patricio. Okay, let's move to discussion session. There is some question in the chat room. There is 6 questions, I think. First from Bu Indras. Bu Indras, do you want to talk directly your question? or I will read for you. I think this question is for Professor Garcini from Bu Indra Stuti. In the term of good news, there is room to closer yield gap at irrigated and rain-fed area. From your analysis, what are kind strategy have to do it? And what is kind nutrient that is very important to increase the yield in Indonesia? It is N, P, K, or all. And how your opinion about the cultivar or variety on the yield on the increasing yield? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Indra, for the question. And in a way, I think Gonzalo already answered part of your question by showing that among all the nutrients, it seems like potassium is becoming more limiting, explaining up to 1/3 of the carrying gap. Of course, I mean, something that is important to recognize is that probably nitrogen and phosphorus are more important than potassium when you look at from the perspective of a long-term trial. The response to nitrogen and phosphorus is very consistent, very large, and that's why farmers like to use N and P. But what we have seen is that in the field, in on-farm conditions, farmers are typically applying sufficient N and P. And therefore, the kind of deficiencies that Ibu Susi was showing in the experiment is very difficult to find that in farmer fields in general. But something that we are seeing in farmer fields more frequently is potassium deficiency that is more subtle and it's not that easy to diagnose. And perhaps more importantly, it's not easy to solve, because if you recommend that to apply farmers too much potassium every year, they will probably lose money. So we need to be very careful there before recommending to apply more potassium. And instead, we should try to do more research on what are the conditions in which farmers should apply potassium. For example, it would be very good if there could be like a national task force on potassium in which we try to understand in which areas the response to potassium is more likely. For example, areas with low potassium mineration water, areas with high yields. Also, areas in which maize is on the crop sequence because maize uptake more potassium. And also try to see what will be the right strategy. Maybe it's not a good idea to ask farmers to apply large potassium on each year, but rather try to apply potassium every year at maintenance level, and then maybe take advantage of years with good price and with high profit and apply more potassium in those years with high profit, kind of a long-term investment. Another way to do it would be, for example, by saying, okay, if you have a very large nitrogen or phosphorus balance, maybe you can cut a little bit of NMP and reinvest that on potassium. So I think that there are many things to do there when it's about potassium. And again, you will look at potassium only when the rest of the management is good. So if there are farmers who have problems with field leveling or with water or with NMP, probably look at those things first. So potassium is kind of the last thing in the list after you take care of the more important things. But having said that, yes, we are finding that potassium is becoming increasingly limited in Indonesian rice systems. Then in relation to variety, that was a very interesting result. Many times we are really obsessed about varieties and about increasing the yield with a new variety. But what we usually find is that in many cases, crops are more limited by management rather than the variety, because at the end of the day, you may have a super yielding high new variety, but if you don't have the right agronomic management, then you are not going to exploit the potential of that new variety. So I think that we need a combination of both things. We need very aggressive good breeding in order to keep up with increasing pest pressure, with increased insect pressure. But at the same time, we need to be very conscious that without a good agronomic background, we are not going to exploit the higher potential of the new varieties. So I think that we need both. But for some reason, we tend to believe that varieties is the only way to go when it's about increasing yields, when in reality, farmers have many things that they can do by agronomic management to increase their yields.
Okay. Bu Indras, do you have any response? Are you satisfied with the answer from Professor Patricio?
Yeah, okay.
Intro there.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, Pak Yudis. Thanks, Prof. Grasini for the answer. And I would like to continue also. Maybe I see in the Gonzalo presentation, yeah, about the potassium application in tidal swarm. This is also very interesting because every season maybe farmers always apply the potassium in the tidal swarm because of low pH. So is it also come up in your analysis, or yeah, that's I would like to know, really to know, because very interesting in your study, because you also including the tidal swarm and the potassium status in the surface is already good, yeah, because the bar of the line, a bar already in the line, it's not in underline,
Yeah,
such as other location.
Yeah,
Thank you, Pak Yudis. That's
Okay.
all.
No, that's an excellent comment, Indra. Yes, as you correctly mentioned, when we look at the potassium balance for tidal rice in South Sumatra and in South Kalimantan, it was like near zero. It was not negative. But you know why is that? Because the yield is lower. So when the yield is lower, you're not going to have potassium deficiency, because probably that yield is way more limited by nitrogen or by phosphorus. So you are going to start to see the potassium deficiency when the yield starts to go high, and when you have a high crop that removes a lot of potassium with the straw. So which is not the case with tidal rice. So I mean, there is a good bad reason behind the zero potassium balance for tidal rice, and it's because of the lower productivity. But as you increase the yield and you start to remove the straw, then you will start to see the potassium deficiency.
Okay, got it. Yeah, thanks. So it's really to be done in the different way, yeah, to be analyzed in the suboptimum or tidal swarm sample, for example. Yeah.
Probably in areas like swampy rice or tidal rice, there are other things to look at first before potassium. Probably, you know, water management, nitrogen, phosphorus. You know, it's like. It's like, in a way, it's like the Green Revolution, right? The Green Revolution started with also in the case of South Kalimantan, local varieties with lower yield. So, you know, in a way, it's like the way of thinking is like the Green Revolution, like, you know, improve modern varieties plus nitrogen, then comes the phosphorus, and then at the end, you know, probably more the potassium and other things. So I would suggest probably in areas, in more marginal environments, probably it makes more sense to look first at water management, nitrogen and phosphorus before looking at potassium. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Also, these areas have a lot of sediment from the canal and from the rivers, and with the sediments come a lot of potassium. So I will also bet that there are a lot of potassium coming from the river and from the canal. In the deltas, it's very common to have a lot of potassium from sediments. So it would be nice to check how much potassium you get from sediments. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Pak Yudis.
That's good, very good explanation from Professor Patricio. So we will move forward to the next question. There is one person raised hand, Pak Ivan Mabaud, but
yes,
yeah, you want directly
okay, thank you.
deliver your question to speakers.
Oh yeah, I want to maybe some small question to Dr. Susiana. Could you hear me?
Yeah,
Could you
very
hear
clear.
my voice?
Yeah, your voice very clear.
Yeah, okay. For the Dr. Susiana, could you show your slide presentation? I didn't know about the response to nitrogen fertilizer. Could you show the slide presentation? Your voice, your microphone is still unmute. Still mute.
Sorry,
I
yeah.
didn't hear. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Could you show me the slide respond to the nitrogen fertilizer? I didn't know what kind of number.
Oh, this one.
Yeah, about the comparison about the
I couldn't
in
hear
Paris
you.
33.
Sorry. Oh.
Which slide? Which
Next.
slide? Not this one.
Next,
This is
about
slide.
the response to nitrogen fertilizer. Yeah.
This is this one.
Yeah. Can you show the 4 figure? Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. My question is, maybe just small talk about the. I see that all the
I'm so
figure
sorry,
have
I couldn't hear you. Sorry,
Yes.
sir.
Yes.
I couldn't clearly hear you.
The voice is very clear, Susi. Maybe in your device.
Somehow.
It's my voice or my
Ivan
Miss
is very
Susiana
clear.
voice. Hello. My voice is clear. Can I continue?
Oh my goodness.
Halo, Bu Susi, kedengaran nggak?
Okay, yeah.
Ya, continue.
Okay. Let me start my question. So I know that you got the 4 figure in your presentation. I just have like a small doubt about your figure for the 1, 2, 3, number 3 in the left, in the bottom left. I see that there is no like error bar in the red one line, right? It's totally different with the other one. I just curious, how many samples did you try to conduct your research? The first question, and the next question is related to the previous slide, but could you show in the next slide?
Next slide.
Yeah, about number of tiller.
Number of tiller. Okay. Yeah.
So the second question, because I'm already from the local district, and I know that you compare with the control and then another treatment. So I just curious about what kind of control did you use in your research? Could you explain about the specification of the control? Maybe you take from the farmer or you create the control by yourself. Okay, maybe that's all my question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. It's not easy to answer if I will be. Okay, thank you, Pak Ivan. Your first question is, I forgot to put standard deviation. So sorry, that's my mistake. Yeah.
It should be standard deviation there.
Yeah. Sorry, that's my mistake. Yeah. Next time in another, I will put all the standard deviation. But it's also like this. We only have 4 replication. So we only have 4 replication for every treatment. That's one, and then also for I think that one you would like to ask about the replication, and then about the number of tiller. Control means without any fertilizer. So we would like to know the indigenous nutrient supply. So no fertilizer added at all. And then I compare to, sorry, this is PHSL, this site-specific nutrient management. So plus NK, that's nitrogen and potassium. The indigenous nutrient supply. So no fertilizer added at all. I don't know what's going on.
So I think, yeah, Bu Susi, maybe I will explain. Pak Ivan, there is control there. every experiment should be there is control there. I think that's enough. Okay, Pak Iwan. Okay, let's, because the time is running and it's almost 11:30. So I will read some question for the speaker. First question from Nurfianto. The question is addressed to Dr. Gonzalo. Because in Indonesia, there are many farmers still depend on chemical fertilizer and pesticide that cause poor soil fertility. What main cause the inadequate leaf potassium concentration in rice field? And is there any suggestion on soil fertility management to fill the gap of yield in the climate change situation? And for Dr. Susiana, is plants biostimulant like seaweed extract, humic acid, etc., can improve rice plant physiology, yield, and soil fertility? Is there any new technology that organic fertilizer can replace 100% chemical fertilizer, and potential research to that? Number 3, irrigation and water level in rice field could affect fertilizer efficiency. How to control irrigation and water level related to farmer behavior and characteristics in Indonesia with many existing technology like SRI. Thank you. So the question, Gonzalo, can you reply that question?
Thank you.
Yes. Yeah. We discussed a little bit at the end of the presentation that I mean we are thinking about the strategies to improve the fertilization of potassium. One of the ways would be, well, maybe one of the last ways would be to change the straw management. But we are thinking that the most efficient way to improve the potassium concentration, the leaf potassium concentration, would be to increase the fertilization, the rate of potassium applied to the field. And and well, what we are thinking now is how to we could detect which are the fields that will respond to that additional fertilization, because we know that there are some fields that doesn't show an interesting response or an interesting return on investment. I mean, an interesting increase on the profitability of that investment. But yeah, so far decrease the removals and increase the inputs, increase the amounts. We know that potassium is the most expensive nutrient. So one of our strategies would be to reinvest for those fields that are over applying nitrogen and phosphorus, cut a little bit the amounts of those nutrients and reinvest those funds to potassium. But this strategy should be checked. I mean, this is right now it's just an idea, but we should check on we should try this, and if it would be a feasible and useful way to go.
Yeah. One more thing is the comment says that use of fertilizer leads to poor soil fertility. Let's be careful to say that fertilizers lead to low soil fertility. What it leads to low soil fertility is not using fertilizer or using them in an inappropriate way. But fertilizers are a key component, is a pillar for good soil health. So it's important to use fertilizer, but it's also very important to know how to use them correctly, with or without climate change, now and in the future. So fertilizers are going to continue to play a big role to sustain food security in the future. And one of the reasons is that although organic fertilizers, manure, and compost, they can all help, to cover plant nutrient requirements. One of the problems is that you require huge amounts of compost or manure to apply the same amount of nutrients compared with nutrient fertilizer. I think that Ibu Susi showed that the manure has 3-4% or 5% of nitrogen. That cannot compete with the urea that has 46%. Just imagine the amount of manure that you will need to replace the urea. So yes, you can complement chemical fertilizer with organic fertilizer, but just imagine if all the farmers do that. Just imagine the amount of manure and compost that you will need. So maybe one day, in many years down the road, it may happen that we can rely solely on organic fertilizers, but in the near future, and I guess for many more years, we are gonna still rely heavily on synthetic fertilizer, complemented to some extent with organic ones.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Patrio. Bu Susi, kindly reply.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. Thank you, Pak. I never do any research on seaweed extract, so that's very interesting to know the result if you ever try it, Bapak Nurfianto. For humic acid, yes, and maybe we can try seaweed or humic acid. We can try to find any source of material to maintain the soil fertility or to improve the soil fertility. So yeah, but I never try seaweed extract, so I couldn't give you a good answer about it. Is there any new technology that organic fertilizer can replace 100% of chemical fertilizer? Recently, I do not recommend to replace 100% of chemical fertilizer, because let's say easy way to see. If you want to buy organic rice at the market, the price is still double or triple compared to the, let's say, common rice. So if you want to replace 100% of chemical fertilizer, means that Pak Yudhistira has to prepare for the decrease of national rice production. So I still think that we still need the chemical fertilizer, but yeah, it maybe has effect for the soil fertility, but that's easy. We need to correct the negative effect of the chemical fertilizer, let's say by apply organic fertilizer. That's one of the way to maintain the soil fertility. And then irrigation and water level in the field could affect the fertilizer efficiency. Yes, sir. I mean, under flooding condition, nitrogen could become NH4+, so that's easy to just we lose it. But if you maintain the dryness and then avoid the water to move out from the field if that's flooding, because comparing flooding condition, that the loss of nitrogen is much higher under dry condition. Yeah, there is like alternate wet and dry, but we need to be careful about that, because water management is related not just with fertilizer but also with weed. So I usually use the water to minimize the weed infestation, especially for direct seeding. And could be also for a system of rice intensification, because usually using a very young seedling, isn't it? Less than 7 days. So I think the competition between the seedling and then the weed will be high. So yeah, I use the water to minimize the infestation of weed, especially at the early of the rice cycle.
Okay.
I think that's my answer, Pak Yudhis. Any?
Okay. Thank you very much, Bu Susi. I think that's enough regarding to the replacing 100% a chemical. Professor Patricio already reply also. Next question from Lia Hadiawati. During the study, how was the yield gap fluctuated following La Nino or El Nino? I think it's for Professor Patricio. Kindly to reply. this
Can you
question.
please repeat the question?
Okay, during your study, how was the yield gap fluctuated following La Nina and El Nino? It's a climate change, La Nina and like climate change.
Okay.
Well,
you know, to estimate the yield gap, we look at the gap now, right? I mean, well, oh, you mean for the projection toward the future?
Yeah.
Well, okay. So first of all, the projection is only 20 years. So in 20 years, you can almost assume that the effect of climate change can be negligible or at least very small, and that to some extent it can be mitigated or because due to adaptation by new varieties and practices and so forth. And perhaps more importantly is that if you look at 20 years, the effect of climate change can be, you know, a few percentage points, but you have a yield gap of 30, 40%. So yes, the yield potential may change a little bit because of climate change, assuming that you know the direction of the climate, which is difficult. But when you look at the change in potential because of climate change, is so small compared with the yield gap. So you ask me what to prioritize in the next 20 years. Well, probably you should prioritize, try to close that potential because you have there 30, 40% points to try to increase the yield versus 1, 2, 3, 4% that you may lose because of climate change. And again, assuming in which direction that will go, because climate change is not only temperature, it's also changes in carbon dioxide, and rice as C3 crops. So to some extent will benefit from the CO2 fertilization. So you may have a penalty due to climate change because of higher temperatures, but then at the same time you're going to have a CO2 fertilization effect. So altogether, the effect of climate change within, you know, a 20-year time period is very small compared with the effect that you will change through, for example, intensifying or closing the yield gap. So I'm not saying that it's not important, but looking at 20 years, the effect is comparably small compared with other things.
Okay, thank you very much. Next question from Bayu Pramono. Based on your explanation previously that nutrition effect in yield gap, Indonesia has various ecosystem, varieties, and climate. What is your opinion about genetic environment, cultivation, and plant physiology? Which one give important role on the yield gap? It's for Professor Patricio, I think.
All right, so thank you for the excellent question. I think that we need to be when it's about research, setting research priorities and decide where to invest money, I think that we always need to think on that, like if the money comes from our pocket, because then it's more likely that we will make good decisions, you know. And you know, when you look at the big picture about rice in Southeast Asia, probably 90% of the rice comes from good environments, from irrigated or from favorable lowland rainfall environments. And then, yes, there are like maybe a 5–10% that come from upland environments, tidal, swamps, deep water. There are so many. But again, that's probably at 10% of the total rice production.
Yeah.
So if I give you a $1 million to invest on rice and to try to increase yields, where will you invest it? You know, will you invest it to try to increase the yield in the 10%? Or will you try to invest it to try to increase the yield in the 90% of the rice that grows into favorable environments? So I'm not saying that we should not care about all of them. Everything is important. But among all important things, there are things that are more important than others. And what I'm saying is that if you have 90% of your rice growing in favorable environments, why not to try to invest there to, for example, close the yield gap, you know? Because if you're able to find something that can help to increase your yield across the 90% of the area where rice is grown in favorable environments, just imagine the impact that can have. And there is also a question, an issue of risk, you know? Usually in these kind of environments like upland, tidal, swamp, the risk is high because of water supply, because of toxicities, also there are many times the socioeconomic context around these extreme environments is not the best one. And therefore, many times what you find is that farmers are not really willing to invest too much on inputs or in these kind of environments because the risk is higher. And that happens all over the world. Usually farmers that are growing crops in risk environments, they are less prone to adopt technologies, to spend money on fertilizer and so forth. And in comparison with farmers in favorable environments where you have good water control, the yield doesn't fluctuate that much, and therefore the return to the investment is more safe. So again, thinking about where to invest money, if you have the chance, probably you would like to prioritize areas where the response to your technology is more likely and wherever there is less risk, because that's probably where you're gonna get a higher return to your investment. And again, I'm not saying that we should not invest on extreme environments, but we should be a little bit cautious there about how long it's gonna take to get the return and how big it's gonna be the return, because most likely it's gonna take longer and the return is gonna be smaller. And that's why my whole presentation started by making the point about how important it is to try to increase productivity on existing cropland areas. Because if we are not going to be able to increase the yield in the areas that we are currently under rice production, then we are going to be pushed to grow more rice into environments that are more risky, less productive, and that require huge investments in order to make them productive. So again, my pledge is always to try to produce more on the land that we have now, so we don't need to move into environments that are more risky and more difficult to make productive.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Potresio. Next question from Setia Sari Grisang is about, I think it is pointed to Gonzalo. Potassium deficiency may occur due to the short fallow time, farmers burn crop residues after harvest. For example, in the maize center, after harvesting, it is immediately burned, processed, and planted. So rice and maize production stagnates. What advice and technology that you recommend to the farmer in dealing with K deficiency? Not only K fertilizer application, because the price of fertilizer is quite high, so we can replace with organic fertilizer related to soil healthy. How to approach 70% yield potential? Maybe we change CI. I mean, it's carbon ratio from 3 to 2, so the straw have time to decompose with proof of profit calculation. I think it's for Gonzalo.
Yeah. Okay. That's okay. Yeah. Yeah. I think we went through that idea in earlier, but yeah, one way will be to try to, as much as possible, try to avoid the straw removal. We know that the straw removal is the main cause of the low balances, and will be lowering making the balances less negative will help us to have to apply or to increase the potassium fertilization not that much, right? So one way to go would be reduce the removal, and we need to see if it is possible in such intensive cropping system, because we know that farmers sometimes needs to remove the straw in order to come plant or one crop following the other and the other. So this will be one way. The other way, reinvest a little bit, cut a little bit the investment on nitrogen and phosphorus, and try to increase the potassium fertilization. This would be the other one. And also knowing how much potassium there is in the water would be helpful. Would be helpful as well to target the site that will be more profitable for the increasement on the investment on potassium.
Yeah, if I have to answer to that from a very pragmatic perspective, and this comes from somebody who worked with farmers in Nebraska and know how farmers think, then I think that you need to think about this like on a stepwise process and be realistic. You know, I mean, farmers are not going to change their straw management in the short term. At the same time, they're not going to invest that much in potassium every year. Potassium is expensive, and most likely it's not going to give you a positive return in many years. So you need to be very strategic here. So if you have a high yield, if you have high crop intensity, if you remove the straw for harvest, and if you are in a place where there is not too much potassium coming from irrigation water, so if all those things, then you can consider, for example, what Gonzalo said. You can, and if you have a large surplus of nitrogen and phosphorus, maybe then you can consider what Gonzalo said. Then you cut a little bit, 10% on nitrogen and phosphorus, and you reinvest it on potassium. Or what you can do is maintain the system at a basal rate of potassium, let's say 30, 20 kilos per year. And then when you have a year in which you make more profit, or where the ratio between fertilizer and grain is low, then you can use that profit in that year to apply a large application. So maybe you don't need to apply a large application of potassium every year. Maybe you only do it once a while when whenever your grain to fertilizer price ratio is favorable and you can afford it. And then you use that as a long-term investment. So, but again, you know, this is very, you know, preliminary. So I think that it's very important first to understand, for example, in which areas the response is likely, because with a 50-50% chance of having a return to the investment that is not really favorable, it's very risky to recommend farmers to apply potassium, a large amount of potassium every year. So I think that we need a little bit more of research here to try to understand which conditions will likely lead to a positive yield and profit response to potassium, and then use that as a basis for recommendation. So I hate to say this, but more research is needed to answer your question, Sari.
Okay, thank you very much for your response. So there is other question from Pak Iskandar Ishak. You mentioned that it should be increasing 50 kg per hectare per year for to meet to closer the yield gap. So it is the Pak Iskandar said that it will not be attractive for the farmer. What is your opinion? Increasing yield 50 kg per hectare is not attractive.
What we indicated before is that if we want Indonesia to be rice sufficient by year 2040, then we will need to increase the average yield by 50 kgs per hectare every year. That's what we want. That's what's needed if we want to be rice sufficient by year 2040 on existing rice cropland. So if you want to produce enough rice for Indonesia by year 2040 within the rice area that exists now, then we will need to increase the rice yield by 50 kgs every year per hectare. Now the question is where we are now, and when you look at where we are now, we are not really doing that great, because in most of the cases in Southeast Asia, you will see that the rice yield has not increased that much over time, especially during the last decade. In most cases, you will find that the yield has plateaued in recent years, and there has been no increase in yield. Actually, if you look at the last 5-6 years of data from FAO for Indonesia, you will see that the yield has not changed. So now our yields at rata in Indonesia are not increasing too much. And therefore, trying to change that and make them grow by 50 kgs per year is a big challenge. Because if we are not able to achieve that yield gain, then that means that there will be more and more pressure to expand rice area into more marginal environments. And we already discussed how difficult it is to have high yields in those environments. So again, the 5 kgs per hectare per year is the rate of yield gain that we need to be rice self-sufficient by year 2050. And yes, it's very difficult to achieve that, and it's going to require way more research and way more investments on agricultural research and development programs.
Yeah, I agree with you, Patricio. The question is only farmer perspective. If you look at in the national scale, the increasing of 15 kg per hectare is very difficult. Yeah. So another question is still from Ibu Setiari Sarigintang. Regarding to the data in 1950 and 1908, the dry season, 1998 and 1995, there is a low response of NPK because of pest and disease. And she also want to know, is this straw returned to the soil? And data C organic and C is plot to, is this trend data of C organic and it's plot to support the experiment data?
Okay, thank you, Pak Yudis. Ibu Sari Girsang. Yeah, some of the data, that's data which affected by the high pest and diseases attack. Yeah, and then, but I do not like, that's a good data because we would like to know also what the effect of the fertilizer to pests and diseases. Let's say like in another slide, not the slide of yield data, we see that if there is enough available potassium, usually the performance is better compared to the better under the high pest and disease attack. That's one of the actually we try to analyze, to collect the data of the strain of the stem, but yeah, I haven't really show the result of that one, but I always say that it is good to get the pest and disease attack at our field, because that could become a new information for us, something like that. And then are the straw returned to the soil? Yeah, during the land preparation, not the straw, the stubble, the remaining straw, about 25 centimeter above ground. Is there any trend data for C organic? And yeah, we have the C organic and also total nitrogen for the data, but we do not collect the data for every season. So we collected like every 2 years, because we want to focus on I think it's very classic if I said that because of the funding, then we need to choose what the data that we want to collect. But yes, we have the data, not in every season, but yes, we have the data. Thank you, Pak.
Okay, another question for Wahyu Nugroho. Is there any limiting nutrient other than NPK?
Yeah, starting. Sorry, yeah, there's something like we now start to see silica, because silica also, that's one of the good thing. And then the interesting thing is about zinc. I don't know, maybe Prof. Patricio and also Gonzalo ever have experiment about zinc. Actually, I ever tried to apply zinc to increase the content of zinc in grain for Nutri-Zinc, but actually for in Pari 32, the application of zinc in Sukamandi, that still increase the yield.
Okay.
So maybe that's specific condition, because if macronutrition maybe that's not in all paddy field, but in some places they have a good positive response for micronutrition. Thank you, Pak.
Okay. So the last question, this is for Professor Patricio and Gonzalo. Could you please share your experience? I got the information in the field, especially in South Sumatra and Lampung, that many farmers apply only small amount of K fertilizer, or even they never apply those fertilizer. The key, they say because the no response of the application, and indeed for other reason is because of the price. It is possible that the K concentrate in the soil is sufficient that could perform watering and or irrigation water, or from the straw that they incorporate into the soil. Or probably there is strategy to apply K fertilizer in terms of growing pace or the type of clay mineral. Yeah, I think the question is almost the same.
I think that we already responded to a similar comment about the balances in tidal areas. So typically, when you have a low yield level and you are in a context of a delta where the water comes from rivers and have a lot of sediments, then my feeling would be that probably potassium is not that important, and that therefore there are probably other things to look at first, including nitrogen, phosphorus, planting material, etc. But having said that, you know, one of the things that I like about agronomy is that we don't need to talk that much. We can run an experiment and get an answer. So something that we would like very much to explore with you under the context of BRIN is a new collaboration in which, for example, if we agree that potassium is something important to look at, then maybe the next step should be to try to have some on-farm trials across the main areas where rice is grown in Indonesia, including South Sumatra and Lampung. And therefore, in 1 or 2 years down the road, when we meet again, then we can have a concrete answer about in which areas and in which specific set of conditions the response to potassium is likely to occur or not. So again, I don't want to say here yes, no, because we don't know too much, you know. Three years ago, I would have never bet that potassium was gonna come up as something important for rice in Southeast Asia. But we found it, you know, just by, you know, having fresh eyes, by being curious, and by collecting data with our colleagues from Indonesia. And now that we have discovered that potassium seems to be important, I think that the next step is to try to understand in which conditions farmers should apply this and how we can inform that decision on potassium to make sure that the return to investment will be positive and that farmers will not lose money. Because at the end of the day, here what is important is not only to increase productivity, but also to increase the farmer's profit. So we want to make sure that whenever we make a recommendation, it's not only from a yield perspective, but it's also from the perspective of farmers making more money. And to do that, we need more research, especially for potassium, because there is very little.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much to all speakers. I think because the time is already over, it's an additional time about 13 minutes. So thank you very much to all speakers. Very interesting and insight us about how to narrowing the yield gap in Indonesia, especially with the approach of nutrient balancing and nutrient management. I think that's all my comment. And again, I very thank you very much to the all speaker, and I hope this sharing session will be I will make some kind of policy brief, and will be given to the deputy of policy, and this will be considered as a policy brief for Ministry Agriculture to take action to to narrowing the yield gap in Indonesia. And we hope that our rice and other cereal production will increase with the future. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Now I return to the MC for next following session.
Thank you for our moderator, Dr. Yudhistira Nugraha. Ladies and gentlemen, for the next session, we would like to give certificate as appreciation and gratitude from Chairman of Research Organization for Agriculture and Food BRIN to all speakers. For the first, Mr. Patricio Grassini, PhD. And next, for Mr. Gonzalo Rijo, PhD. And to Mrs. Susiana Susanti, SPMSc. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, as we have informed at the chat box, now we will announce the lucky participant, which will receive the door prize of 50,000 prepaid voucher for each. Congratulations to Mrs. Indrastuti Rumanti, Ms. Setia Sari Girsang, Mr. Nurfianto Giar, Ms. Lia Hadiawati. Thank you for your active participation in this sharing session. You may contact Ms. Tria Sita Resmi at phone number 1318285 to claim your door prize. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we have followed our agenda today. On behalf of the committee, I would like to say thank you very much to Ms. Puji Lestari, PhD, to our speaker, Mr. Patricio Grassini, PhD, Mr. Gonzalo Rizo, PhD, Mrs. Susiana Susanti, SPMSc, for the time and to share a very interesting and fruitful talk. Thank you very much to our moderator, Dr. Yudhistira Nugraha, and also thank you very much to all participants who have attended and actively participated this event. See you in the next event. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.